I never expected that spending time with my dog while my husband was away would lead to the most thrilling day of my life. This realization started a few weeks ago when my husband left for a business trip, leaving me and our dog, Bailey, at home. The house always felt unusually quiet during his absences, a silence that was more overwhelming than just the lack of noise. Over the years, I had gotten used to this, as his trips were frequent, often stretching for days or even weeks. I didn't hold any resentment toward his work. It supported our comfortable suburban life, complete with a large backyard and a house that often felt too big for just the two of us, or more often just for me and Bailey. Bailey, our golden retriever, had been my constant companion for 5 years, ever since we brought him home as a fluffy, clumsy puppy. Over time, his presence became my anchor. While my husband worked long hours or travelled to distant cities, Bailey was always there, greeting me with a wagging tail, a soft nudge, and those expressive eyes that seemed to understand more than any dog should. That evening was one of those nights when the emptiness of the house weighed heavily on me. I tried to fill the silence with music, the TV, and even an audiobook, but nothing brought comfort. After dinner, a lonely affair of reheated leftovers, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, Bailey sprawled at my feet. He stayed close, as if sensing I needed company on nights like these. I reached down, letting my hand rest on his thick, golden fur. "You're all I have tonight, aren't you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Bailey responded with a low, contented sigh, his tail thumping softly against the floor. The bond we shared had always been special. He was more than just a pet, he was a confidant, a presence that filled the void left by my husband's absence. Over time, I had come to realize how much I relied on him for his quiet companionship, which offered a comfort I couldn't find elsewhere. It wasn't just his loyalty or gentle nature, but the way he seemed to truly understand me, as if he could sense the parts of myself I struggled to put into words. The evening dragged on, the minutes passing with agonizing slowness. I aimlessly scrolled through my phone, looking at pictures of friends and their families, their lives full of noise and chaos, which only made the silence of my own life feel more pronounced. Bailey shifted beside me, resting his head on my lap, and I couldn't help but smile. At least I wasn't completely alone. I stroked his fur, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. "You're such a good boy," I murmured softly. His tail wagged in response and he let out a contented sigh. Moments like these filled me with gratitude for the simple, unconditional love he gave so freely. While it wasn't the same as having my husband there, it was enough to ease my loneliness. As the wine began to take effect, my thoughts softened and I sank deeper into the couch. Bailey shifted again, curling up beside me as if trying to shield me from the emptiness of the house. I reached down, stroking his back, and found myself talking to him without thinking. "You know, Bailey," I said quietly, "I sometimes wonder if he realizes how much time he spends away. I know he's busy, doing what he needs to do, but sometimes I just wish he'd be here." Bailey's ears twitched, and he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a deep understanding that made my chest ache. It was silly. I knew I was projecting my feelings onto him. But in that moment, it felt like he understood me in a way no one else could. "Do you get it, don't you?" I continued, holding his paw and gently massaging it. "You're always here, though." As the room grew quieter, the only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of Bailey's breathing. I let my hand rest on his side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest, which had a calming, grounding effect that I desperately needed. The silence, no longer oppressive, became almost comforting with Bailey by my side. As the night wore on, I began to reflect on the life my husband and I had built. It wasn't bad. We had a nice home, financial stability, and a generally smooth routine, but over time, a sense of emptiness had crept in, one I couldn't quite place. The emotional distance between us had grown into a quiet gap that neither of us seemed ready to address. Bailey nudged my hand with his nose, pulling me out of my thoughts. I smiled down at him, grateful for the distraction. "Thanks, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "You always know what I need, don't you?" His tail wagged, and his eyes shone with a warmth that made my heart ache. Moments like these reminded me of how important he was to me and the unexpected ways he had become a part of my life. He wasn't just a dog, he was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. I spent hours on the couch with Bailey, feeling the weight of the evening slowly lift as his presence filled the emptiness. By the time I finally got up to go to bed, I felt lighter, more at peace. Bailey followed me, as he always did, settling on his bed at the foot of mine. As I turned off the light and lay down, I found myself whispering into the darkness, "Good night, Bailey. Thank you for being here." As I drifted off, a sudden realization hit me. The intensity of his gaze had stirred something in me. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the solitude and longing for something more, but in that moment, I wasn't sure. Later, I would come to understand that this realization would push me to act in ways I never imagined. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Bailey's tail thumping against the floor. He always seemed to know when I needed an extra push to start the day. His golden eyes peered over the edge of the bed, and I smiled as he let out a low, happy bark, as if to say, "Good morning, let's get going." I swung my legs over the side of the bed, scratching my head as Bailey nuzzled against me. All right, I'm up," I chuckled. Bailey dashed to the bedroom door, pausing to look back at me as if urging me to follow. This had become our routine. His quiet insistence that life goes on, even when the house felt too big and too quiet without my husband around, was something I had come to rely on. After breakfast, Bailey headed to the sliding glass door that opened to the backyard, his tail wagging eagerly. I grabbed his leash from the hook by the door, and his excitement grew. His whole body seemed to buzz with energy. A walk was exactly what I needed to clear my head and shake off the lingering thoughts from the night before. The neighborhood was still waking up, the streets quiet except for the occasional chirping of birds and the distant sound of a lawnmower. Bailey stayed close to my side as we walked, his leash loose, his steps matching mine. This was one of the things I loved most about him, his calm, steady presence. Even when everything else felt chaotic, Bailey had a way of keeping me grounded and reminding me to focus on the present. As we passed the park, I decided to let him off the leash. He bounded ahead, his ears flopping as he ran, and the sheer joy on his face made me smile. Watching him like that, so free and full of life, always made me feel a little lighter. I sat on a nearby bench, letting the sun warm me as I kept an eye on Bailey. He was chasing a squirrel now, though his efforts were more playful than serious. "You're ridiculous, you know that?" I called out, laughing as he trotted back to me, his tail wagging wildly and his tongue hanging out. He flopped down at my feet, and for a while we just sat there, soaking in the peacefulness of the morning. I found myself talking to Bailey again, as I often did when it was just the two of us. There was something comforting about it, as if he were a sounding board for the thoughts I couldn't quite put into words for anyone else. "I don't know, Bailey," I began, bending down to rub his ears. "I keep thinking about how life might be different if things weren't the way they are, if we weren't stuck in this same old routine." He looked up at me with those big, expressive eyes, and I could almost imagine him saying, "I'm listening." It was silly, of course, to think he understood the complexities of my thoughts, but in moments like that, it felt like he did. "Don't get me wrong," I added, leaning back against the bench. "I'm grateful for what we have, but sometimes it feels like something's missing, you know? Your dad's a good man, but he's gone so much, and when he's here, it's like we're just going through the motions." Bailey let out a soft whine, resting his head on my knee, and I felt a pang of guilt. "Sorry for rambling," I said, scratching the top of his head. But Bailey didn't seem to mind. He stayed by my side, his head on my knee and his tail wagging slowly. Moments like these reminded me how much I depended on him, not just as a pet, but as a companion, a friend who was always there when I needed support. As the morning turned to afternoon, we headed back home. I spent the rest of the day tackling chores, which helped pass the time. Bailey followed me from room to room, his presence a constant comfort. He settled in the corner of whatever room I was in, his eyes following my movements as if to reassure me he was there. Later that evening, after dinner, I found myself back on the couch with Bailey curled up beside me. The loneliness I usually felt when my husband was away was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy as it had the night before. Bailey had a way of easing the emptiness, making the silence feel less overwhelming. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, and every time I looked at Bailey, I was reminded of what it was. I reached down to stroke his fur, my fingers gliding over his smooth coat. "You're a lifesaver, you know that," I said quietly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Bailey responded with a soft sigh, his tail thumping gently against the couch. I smiled, leaning back and finally letting myself relax for the first time all day. The warmth of his body against mine was comforting in a way nothing else seemed to be. As the evening stretched on, I found myself thinking about the bond we shared. It wasn't just his loyalty or companionship, though those things were important. It was the way Bailey seemed to see me, to understand me, in a way that felt almost human. He was more than just a dog. He was a reminder that I wasn't alone, even in the quietest, loneliest moments. I stayed on the couch with Bailey long after the sun had set, the two of us wrapped in the quiet warmth of our shared space. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself, but in that moment, it felt like enough. The days blended together, the routine of my life steady but unremarkable. My husband's return was delayed again, another trip that had stretched longer than planned. I told myself I was fine with it. After all, I'd grown used to his absences. But as the days passed, I found myself leaning on Bailey more and more. It was late afternoon when I stood at the kitchen sink scrubbing dishes while Bailey lay sprawled in the doorway, his ears twitching at the faint sounds from outside. The golden light streaming through the window filled the room with warmth, but I still felt a chill inside. My thoughts wandered as I stared out at the backyard, the weight of my loneliness pressing down on me. "Bailey!" I called softly, breaking the silence. He lifted his head, his eyes locking on mine as if he could sense the shift in my mood. "Let's get out of here." Grabbing his leash, I led him to the car. We didn't have a specific place in mind, but simply leaving the house felt like a small act of rebellion against the dull routine. Bailey sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, his fur fluttering in the breeze as I drove aimlessly through town. His joy was contagious, and for the first time that day I found myself smiling. We ended up at a nature reserve on the edge of town, where the walking trails were peaceful, filled only with the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. I let Bailey off his leash, watching as he bounded ahead, his tail wagging with excitement. He had always loved the outdoors, and seeing him so full of life eased the heaviness in my chest. I followed him down the trail, the soft crunch of gravel beneath my feet, keeping me grounded. Bailey darted between the trees, pausing now and then to glance back at me as if making sure I was still there. His energy was uplifting, and I felt a calm settle over me, the tension in my shoulders easing as I breathed in the fresh, clean air. As we walked, my thoughts turned to the life I'd built with my husband. I loved him, at least I thought I did. Lately, though, that love had started to feel more like a habit than a feeling. A quiet companionship that lacked the spark it once had. In his absence, Bailey had filled the gap with his unwavering loyalty, offering comfort to my restless heart. I found a quiet clearing and sat on a fallen log, watching Bailey explore with his tail wagging. Eventually he came back and flopped down at my feet with a contented sigh. I reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he nuzzled against my hand, his warm, steady presence grounding me once more. "You're my anchor, you know that," I said softly. Bailey looked up at me, his expressive eyes filled with a warmth that made my chest tighten. Moments like these reminded me how much he meant to me, his presence becoming a lifeline in a world that often felt overwhelming. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing, and I stayed there with Bailey, the two of us wrapped in the quiet peace of the moment. The outside world seemed to fade away until it was just us. In that stillness, I felt an unusual clarity, as if the weight of my thoughts had lifted, allowing me to simply exist. As we headed back to the car, I realized how much I'd needed this break. From the house, from the routine, and from the endless thoughts that had been weighing on my mind. Bailey trotted beside me, his steps matching mine, and I felt a deep gratitude for him. He wasn't just my dog. He was my constant companion, my anchor, the one thing that made loneliness bearable. The drive home was quiet, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Bailey curled up in the passenger seat, his head resting on his paws, breathing steadily. I reached over, letting my hand rest on his back, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was searching for. When we got home, the house felt less empty and oppressive. Bailey followed me inside, wagging his tail as he settled onto his bed by the couch. I sank into the cushions, feeling a quiet contentment. The bond I shared with Bailey was unlike anything else in my life, pure, uncomplicated, and unwavering. And that night, as I lay in bed with Bailey at my feet, I found myself thinking about the connection we shared. Putting it into words was hard, but the truth of it was undeniable. He filled the void left by my husband's absence. Bailey wasn't just a dog. He was my companion, my confidant, and in many ways, my closest friend. For now, that was enough, wasn't it? The next night was unusually dark, the heavy blackness wrapping around the house like a thick blanket. The air felt heavy, almost charged, as if a storm was brewing. Bailey moved quietly beside me as I walked through the house, his footsteps soft but his presence comforting. I didn't turn on the lights, letting the faint glow of the moon guide me to the couch. I sank into the cushions, and Bailey settled beside me, resting his head on my lap. The silence of the house was suffocating, the emptiness a sharp reminder of my husband's absence, even though he wasn't there. My hand instinctively stroked Bailey's fur, my thoughts echoing. "You're all I have right now," I murmured, my voice barely audible in the stillness. Bailey responded with a soft huff, his tail thumping against the couch. He looked up at me, his golden eyes filled with an understanding that made my chest ache. I let out a shaky breath, my hand resting on his fur. It was just the two of us. The words hung in the air, heavier than I'd expected, but Bailey didn't seem bothered. He nuzzled closer, his warmth wrapping around me as the weight of my loneliness grew. The bond between us felt different that night, deeper. It wasn't just the comfort of his presence or his ability to sense my emotions. It was something more, a connection that went beyond words or logic. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting myself sink into the moment, the quiet, the warmth of Bailey beside me. Time seemed to fade as we stayed like that, the two of us wrapped in stillness. My hand moved to his head, my fingers tracing the soft curve of his ears. He let out a low, contented sigh, his tail wagging gently against the couch. The sound of his steady breathing filled the room, anchoring me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I opened my eyes and looked down at him. Our gazes met, and for a moment everything else disappeared. The room, the empty house, the ache of my husband's absence. It all melted away, leaving just the two of us. My hand stayed on his head, my fingers running through his fur as I felt an inexplicable pull, a connection so deep it took my breath away. Bailey shifted, pressing closer, his warmth chasing away the cold emptiness in my chest. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forehead against his, closing my eyes again, letting the moment wash over me. It was a feeling unlike any other, a mix of comfort and longing, gratitude, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. "I can't imagine what I would do without you," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. Bailey responded by gently nuzzling his nose against my cheek, his tail wagging once more. It seemed as though he understood the unspoken bond that had grown between us. The moment stretched on, the outside world fading away as I stayed with Bailey, the connection wrapping around me like a lifeline. It wasn't just his presence, his unwavering loyalty, or his steady companionship. It was the way he made me feel seen and understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure how long we stayed like that, but when I finally pulled back, my heart was racing, my breath shallow. Bailey's eyes were fixed on mine, his expression calm but intense, as if he were waiting for something. My hand lingered on his head, my fingers trailing down to his collar as I struggled to find the words to explain what I was feeling. But there were no words for this, no way to capture how much Bailey meant to me or how his presence had filled the empty spaces in my life. All I could do was sit there, my hand resting on his fur, my heart pounding as I tried to process the moment. Eventually, I leaned back against the couch, my hands still on Bailey as he settled beside me once more. The weight of the moment lingered, a quiet reminder of the bond we shared and how he had become so much more than just a dog to me. As the night wore on, I felt a subtle sense of clarity settle over me, not the kind that comes from logic, but something deeper, more instinctive. Bailey had always been my anchor, my constant in a world that often felt too chaotic and too lonely. In that moment, I realized just how much I needed him. Not just as a companion, but as a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. The house was still silent as I eventually made my way to bed, Bailey following close behind. He curled up at the foot of the bed, his presence a quiet reassurance that I wasn't entirely alone. I lay in the darkness, my thoughts swirling, yet my heart felt a little lighter and calmer as I drifted off to sleep, whispering into the silence. "Thank you, Bailey." Bailey gazed at me with an intensity that seemed to understand my loneliness and my longing for something more. His eyes seemed to suggest he could fulfill those desires while my husband was away. A change began within me, making me wonder if I should give in to these temptations. I might have said no, I couldn't go through with it, but a part of me was undeniably curious about what he might offer. I wasn't ready to give in to that temptation just yet. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, filling the room with a golden glow. I woke up, the weight of the previous night still heavy in my thoughts, while Bailey was already awake, sitting quietly by the bed, his tail sweeping the floor in slow, deliberate movements. "Morning, buddy," I murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. He leaned into my hand, his warm breath tickling my wrist. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. As I got ready for the day, Bailey followed me from room to room, his presence a quiet comfort. The events of the previous night lingered in my mind, vivid and raw, as if they had been etched into my memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us, though I wasn't sure what it meant. After breakfast, I found myself back on the couch, Bailey at my feet. The quiet of the house felt less oppressive today, more like a cocoon than a void. I let my fingers trail through Bailey's fur, my mind drifting as I tried to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. For years I had buried my feelings, pushed them down to keep life running smoothly. But Bailey had a way of drawing them out, forcing me to confront the loneliness I had tried so hard to ignore. His unwavering loyalty and quiet understanding had been a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed until it was too late. Bailey was looking at me with those eyes again, and suddenly I couldn't resist anymore. We had a bond so close that I felt compelled to give in. It was as if he was telling me he could fill the void of my loneliness with excitement. I leaned in toward him, and he immediately understood. I kissed him, and there was a tension between us that I can't quite describe. Things moved quickly, and while I can't go into full details, I can say that I let myself go. I went on my knees and turned around. Wow. When Bailey was doing his thing, I could have never imagined it would feel that good. The bond we shared only made it more intense, and it was absolutely incredible. After about 30 to 40 minutes, he finished, and I sighed, leaning back against the cushions. "What are we doing, Bailey?" I asked softly, my voice filled with a mix of wonder and confusion. He looked up at me, his golden eyes locking onto mine as if waiting for a response. The rest of the day passed in a blur of mundane tasks and fleeting moments of clarity. I folded laundry, tidied the kitchen, and walked Bailey through the neighborhood, all the while acutely aware of the weight of our bond pressing on me, an undeniable reality I could no longer ignore. By evening, I found myself restless, nervous energy coursing through me that I couldn't shake. I grabbed Bailey's leash and headed out, seeking some mental clarity. The air was crisp and cool, with a faint scent of wood smoke drifting on the breeze. As we walked to the park, the paths were quiet. lit only by the gentle glow of street lamps and the occasional flicker of distant headlights. Bailey trotted beside me, his steps steady and confident as he matched my pace. I let him lead, trusting his instincts as we ventured deeper into the park. Eventually we reached a secluded clearing, the grass damp with dew and the air filled with the soft sounds of the night. I sat on a bench, Bailey settling at my feet, his warmth chasing away the evening chill. The stars above were bright and scattered across the sky like shards of glass. And for a moment, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders as Bailey shifted, resting his head on my knee, prompting me to stroke his fur. The familiar motion grounded me. "You've always been here for me, haven't you?" I said softly, my voice breaking the stillness of the night. He responded with a quiet whine, his tail thumping against the ground. This simple gesture filled me with a warmth that chased away the lingering shadows of doubt and loneliness. Bailey wasn't just my dog, he was my companion, my anchor, my constant in a world that often felt too vast and isolating. As the minutes turned into hours, I found myself opening up, the words spilling out like water overflowing a dam. I shared my fears, my uncertainties, and the pain of a marriage that had become more routine than real connection. I talked about the nights spent alone and the times when his presence had been the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Through it all, Bailey stayed by my side, his calm presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. His loyalty and love were unmatched, filling gaps in my heart I hadn't even realized were empty. The drive home was quiet, a silence filled with meaning rather than emptiness. Bailey curled up in the passenger seat, his eyes closing as the rhythm of the road lulled him to sleep. I glanced at him, a smile tugging at my lips as I reached over to stroke his fur. When we got home, the house felt warmer and more welcoming than it had in weeks. Bailey followed me to the couch, settling beside me as I wrapped myself in a blanket. The quiet companionship we shared reminded me that even in my loneliest moments, I wasn't truly alone. I rested my head against the back of the couch, my fingers absently tracing patterns in Bailey's fur. "You're my rock," I murmured, my voice heavy with emotion. "You've always been there for me, Bailey." He shifted closer, his body pressing against mine, his tail wagging gently. The connection between us was undeniable, a bond that went beyond words or explanation. It was something I didn't fully understand, but I knew it was real, and that was enough. As the hours passed, the house grew quieter, the outside world fading into the stillness of the night. I stayed on the couch with Bailey, his presence a steady source of comfort as I let myself drift into a peaceful haze. No matter what the future held, I knew one thing for sure. Bailey would be there. His loyalty was unwavering, his love a constant in a world that often felt unpredictable. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity, a quiet assurance that I wasn't alone. As I fell asleep with Bailey curled up beside me, I realized that whatever came next, we would face it together. As he lay next to me, I found myself wondering if what we had done was justified. Am I strange, or is this more common than I think?